double reed professors from Columbus State University, which is one of our sister USG institutions, to talk to us about double reeds, which is something that we don't always get enough on specialty-wise in our education. So we're excited to have Sarah Frier, who is a chamber musician extraordinaire. She plays bassoon everywhere and is an assistant professor of bassoon at Columbus State University. And Dr. Susan Tomkowitz, who is the professor of oboe and a Fox performing artist. And so I'm going to get out of their way and let them teach us all the things we don't know about double reeds.
Great. Thank you, Tina. We are really happy to be here with you today. I wanted to just ask a couple of questions. I know that there's just a few of us here, but for those of you that are here, can I ask what your comfort level is with the double reeds to start with?
For me, it was very challenging. Although, fun fact, my brother, unfortunately, he stopped once he graduated high school, but he was a bassoonist. And my mom, my dad, and I were telling my brother, Xavier, you need to continue in your college studies. He ended up being a history teacher. So he's a history teacher and an ESOL. So he followed like my mom is an ESOL teacher as well. But yeah, I think he was the only bassoonist at that time, but we were in Lovejoy High School in the early or late 90s. And I think the teacher at that time, Mr. Ryan, was having my brother borrow it because it was so expensive. But my brother, practice, he was, wonderful bassoonist. He got all the parts. And just hearing like the sounds and everything, I don't think I ever tried. I think just looking at it was very intimidating. But yeah, it was something that we had wished that my brother had continued that, but he just had a knack for playing and practicing and did very well. And I think it's something to be admired, just double reed. And so that's my experience. I ended up being an orchestral student, and then later on, of course, student. I found that the band instruments, for some reason in my brain, just didn't want to click for me. And the same for my brother. He was like, he didn't want anything to do with strings. He was all about the band. He was all about the bassoon. It was the best instrument, he said, for him. So yeah.
Awesome.
Good. So, Andre, tell us about the double reeds in your program. You have a few, I think.
Yeah. So we have two bassoonists who's just starting this year. They're taking private lessons, and we have a oboe player. This is her second year, but she's been taking private lessons the entire time as well. I'm pretty beginner level with it. And I'm learning more and more through them and through their private lessons experiences. And it's just a different sound that an ensemble that you never know you needed until you had it. So
yeah, that's fair. So we get like a tiny bit of double reeds in our skill set. Hopefully we can help with that today. Have either of you done play testing for double reeds to try to match your students with their instruments?
I have not.
Victoria?
No, because I'm orchestra and chorus.
Yeah.
And then I think I tried to rent a double reed instrument at a local music shop, and they said they didn't have the availability for it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So your orchestral program is mostly strings, I'm guessing. Yeah.
Yes, I'm currently as a chorus person, but I could do both. So it would, if I were to be an orchestral director, yes, I would be just the four strings: violin, viola, cello, and bass.
Gotcha. So what Sarah and I plan to sort of focus on, at least to start with, and we can kind of see where this all takes us, is walking through some of the ways that you can do some play testing. So our hope is that we get you guys more comfortable assessing students to see if they're good matches for the double reeds, and then kind of show you some things to help you navigate that process to find those students that are going to be a good match. And then kind of we'll see where we are time-wise with that. I do want to say before we get into the play testing, and I think Sarah agrees with me, that we would love to, there are some stigmas out there about like certain GPAs a student should have, or like financial level of the family that a student should have, to undertake a double reed instrument. And we'd like to sort of break those stigmas down. So we sort of feel like you don't have to be a member of Mensa to be able to play a double reed instrument.
And
Um,
anyone can learn to play a double reed instrument.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And also, the financial obligation, the only thing that maybe we can offer there is just making sure that the parents understand that reed supply has to be sort of a continuous thing. So you don't buy the instrument and you don't buy a reed. It's like, we're usually recommending that those students have 3 good functional reeds at all times. And it probably means that they're going to be replacing at least one of those reeds monthly, if not all 3, depending on how much the students are playing. So just making sure that the students and their parents especially understand that financial piece of it, because reeds are not cheap. And they're so critical for the success of the students playing these instruments, because the instruments are hard enough, right, if their equipment is not functioning well. So yeah, Victoria, you have a question?
Yes, and I think that's important, especially in my previous orchestra lessons, is trying to inform. And I think I did this when the student would come to me for lessons, and I think it's helpful as educators, even for band directors, is to right off the bat be very upfront and direct with the parent and say, yes, just because you have the instrument doesn't mean that the cost stops there. It continues, whether it's accessories, whether it's an orchestra. You have to buy strings. Strings are going to break. The pegs are going to break. The bridge is going to break. You get rosin. You got, and for band, you've got to buy the reeds. You've got to buy the accessories. You've got to buy the valve oil. You've got to buy all these things. And then just kind of making sure, in a very respectful way, telling parents, this is an investment. You're investing. Think of like a long-term investment. These are things that your children, they're going to need, kind of like going to, their course studies. They're going to need pencils. They're going to need paper. They're going to need crayons. And I think just maybe as educators kind of facilitating that piece, the accessories, in a way to where it is comparable to student going to a core class, then maybe the parent will say, okay, yeah, it's the same, even though it's music, but it's the same type of mentality to where it is an investment. I'm investing in my child. I'm investing in their music education, just like I'm investing in their math. They need a calculator and all that stuff. And I think for educators, when you're up front right from the beginning, even the first week of school, I think it's less jarring, and parents are willing to accept that piece of, repurchasing the reeds or repurchasing what they need, instead of waiting till there's an issue and then the parent's like, oh, I don't have the money for that. I didn't know that. I wish I knew that. And I think that would help.
Sue, I have a question. As a single reed player, I tend to play test several reeds, and I choose the ones I like the best, and I ABC them, and I rotate when I play. So then if A breaks, I can still play B and C, and then I just replace A. Is that something y'all do as double reed players?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not just having those 3 reeds. It's like cycling through the 3 reeds, because they're going to last longer if they're rotating through them. Mm-hmm. But, all of the reeds are different. So it also makes the student more flexible and be able to adapt to the reed that they happen to have in the instrument at that particular time, or in that space that the temperature and the humidity and all the things are different. And it's making those reeds feel a little bit different. So it's not just like good hygiene.
Yeah.
Do not play a reed for 4 months, but there's other beneficial elements to that as well.
Yeah. And I say with younger students, sometimes it's, if we label them A, B, C, D, or you can, put a little sticker on the bassoon with the wrapping, the thread that's there. You can put a little Sharpie on it, 1, 2, 3, or a little dot or something. Or if they get reeds that have different colors, then you tell them today is, blue day, today is light blue day, today is green day. And so then every day they're playing on that different reed. Kind of helps them with that, keeping with the cycle there. So with the rotation.
Yeah. Yeah, I number all of my reeds, and I number all of my students' reeds also. So let's talk a little bit about the plate testing. Yeah, Andre, go ahead.
I'm sorry. While we were talking about reeds, I know it's different than the single reed instruments. We went to Midwest, and we were visiting different booths to inquire about, like, I guess, buying like a group of like oboe reeds and bassoon reeds, and they were basically saying, like, I guess they're all like custom made, or like it's not like a one size fits all type of deal, which can get kind of challenging. But when we're trying to start students on instruments and we just want to have a few on stock, is there anything you suggest for that?
Yeah, we will share with you guys towards the end of our time today. We've got a slide. We're not going PowerPoint heavy today, but we're just going to share one slide from a presentation we did at GMEA last year that will connect you to each of our personal websites where we have the double, what was it? Demystifying the double reads is what we did last year. So you guys can access that, and there's information on that about where we recommend you buy your reeds. The reeds for oboe that you buy at the local music store most likely are short scraped, which means they're scraped for a European setup, which is completely different embouchure wise than what we do in the States. So I as much as possible, I sort of strongly suggest stay away from those as much as you can. But I know that's only as good as knowing where then the other place is that you can get your reads. So hopefully that information in those slides will be helpful for you for that. But then if that's not helpful enough, then you reach out to me and I'll get you connected to some places that that some of my students have had success finding some double reads.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. So let me talk just a little bit about things to try and things to navigate when play testing for oboe, and then I'll kick it over to Sarah. I'm pointing because she's right in front of me. The one thing in my opinion, that I think is the most important thing for oboe is assessing whether the student can blow enough to get the oboe to speak. So, right, the reeds for oboe, they're so small. And the two reeds vibrating together are, of course, what make the noise, but it takes a really fast, very focused, directed airstream to get the reed to speak. So that's the first thing that I'm looking for. Like, can the student blow a healthy enough airstream to be able to get the reed to speak? So it's not like having your, I don't know, the spray that you can do on your brass mouthpieces, right, to go between students. So unfortunately, it's that kind of makes the process, I think, a little more complicated because you're going to have to sanitize the reed in between your students. The best thing that I know to use is isopropyl alcohol. But it's not a quick dump, right? You have to like let the reed kind of soak in it for probably a minute or so, and then kind of like swirl it in some water to get that alcohol out because it's not going to taste very good. The downside to that is once you do the soak, to just check the aperture. I don't know how well you can see my reed. You really can't. I understand that. But the longer a reed soaks in something, the more it's going to bloat up. So there's a good chance that after that reed soaks in the alcohol, the aperture of the reed itself is going to be pretty large. So you might have to carefully kind of massage the back part of the reed just a little bit to get that reed down, because having a super big aperture, no one's going to be able to make noise on that reed. So you just have to sort of check that the reed didn't blow up because we soaked it for a minute in the alcohol. But we do want to sanitize between the people that are putting their mouths on the reed, because I don't think we can afford to buy 40 different reeds for 40 people that might come across the table. So the first thing that I do when we are making reeds, we do what is called crow. When we crow the reed, we put the embouchure all the way up to the thread. That's not how we play it, but this is how we listen for the different components in the sound of the crow to sort of assess what we're going to scrape next. So that is like literally putting the reed all the way to the thread and just blowing. So for me, that's easy because I've done it 12 million times in the last many years I've been playing the oboe. But for someone that's not done this, you're gonna be like, and so you're going to have to keep encouraging them, like, okay, and maybe do it with them, take a big breath and keep encouraging them to blow the air. So if they start to make some successful noise, it's not going to be a good noise, but it's going to be some noise. Then we're going to say, okay, great. Now let's think a little bit about your bottom lip. So your soft bottom lip over the sharp part of your teeth. And then you can show them like the dry part of the outer lip and then the wet part inside of the lip. I call that the wet dry line. So like place the reed on the wet dry line and then soft part of the lip is over the teeth. And then they say, okay, take a breath and then bring the top lip down and see if they can blow. So there might be some finagling there because sometimes the teeth are too closed, even if the outside is doing what it needs to do. So a quick trick for them to get the teeth open is like just turn the reed sideways. Or then put the reed back, but keep that space between the teeth. I call it the tooth check. Even my college students are doing the tooth check. So I try to just make it 3 to 4 easy steps like, okay, bottom lip, wet dry line, breathe in, set the lip, blow, breathe and blow. So lower lip, wet dry line, breathe, blow, go. So if they're successful there, then then we take the instrument. And so I'm not going to show them how to put the instrument together. I might not even let them put the reed in the instrument. I might just do it for them because we're probably trying to cycle through kids pretty quickly. So we're going to put the reed in, and then I'm going to guide them to their fingers on the instrument. So I'm going to show them like, okay, right thumb is going to come under the thumb rest. We're going to rest this left thumb here. Even though they may not play the instrument, I want to encourage good habits right here, like right the first time they're going to put their hand on the instrument. So I'm not going to say, go ahead and put down 1 and 1. What I'm going to do is say, let's put down 3 and 3, and then 2 and 2, 1 and 1. Because when we orient kids to 1 and 1 on oboe, this is how they tend to play. So they tend to have their wrists angled up, and we need those wrists, really the hands, to kind of be perpendicular to the bore of the instrument. So I'm going to say, bring things to 3 and 3, and then we're going to set those other fingers down. But then I'm going to have them take away their right fingers. And I just want them to play G, 1, 2, 3 on the left hand. So when we then come back here, I want to remind them, okay, let's carefully, bottom lip, wet, dry, like they're going to have to search for it, right? Because spatially, this is weird. Breathe and blow. And hopefully they make sound. If the sound isn't coming out, then maybe the tooth check again. But if they can make the crow noise, then they should be able to make noise with sort of a pseudo embouchure, and then that transfers into the reed going into the instrument, and then being able to make some noise there. So it's a very like super quick process. Crow, embouchure-ish on the reed in the oboe. Set them to 3 and 3, see if they can play a G. If they're doing great, then like have them like learn Hot Cross Buns and Mary Had a Little Lamb, like whatever you call the song. It was Mary Had a Little Lamb up in the Northeast when I learned an instrument. So that's sort of the quick and easy way, I think, to sort of assess a student very quickly to see if like, yep, they're going to be able to do the thing because they've got a healthy enough airstream. It's all about the air. Good. Any questions that we can triage real quick on that before I hand it over to Sarah? Oh, go ahead, Victoria.
I do remember from when I was doing the instrumental studies class with Dr. Holmes-Davis about the different embouchures, and I forgot his name. One of the professors, he has glasses, plays the saxophone.
Dr. Allen.
Yes, Dr. Allen. I think he was discussing like different embouchures. Now, is there, like, if a student really wants to play the oboe or the bassoon and they can make the crow sound on the reed, is there any physical, as far as like the structure of the mouth and the lips or anything, that would deter students from playing those instruments?
The only thing that I would say for oboe, and it's pretty rare, I think, in general, but if someone has an underbite, then that can make it a little more difficult. Not impossible, but like it's more common for us to be set up like just in our anatomies, I think, to have the overbite, the upper teeth. So if the student has an underbite, you just have to sort of assess that there can be enough space that intonation wise, they're not always going to be sort of sharp and shallow, I think. That's a good question.
As it relates to bassoon, and I'll get to the play testing here in a second, but to kind of answer this question from the bassoon, I think the majority of the American public does have an overbite, and an underbite would not preclude like someone from playing bassoon, because we actually want to go more towards an equalized bite. But if there's a natural overbite or a little bit of an underbite, that can be okay. But we're really trying to find equalize pressure. So when we have a natural overbite, if this is my top lip and my thumb is my bottom lip, if we're putting pressure points in two different places, now the reed is vibrating unequally on both sides. So we really want the teeth more equalized. So that's an approach. Even with I have a natural overbite, grew up and I had a very severe overbite that can take some, we kind of have to get used to it a little bit. So if a student has an underbite, they're working to create an equalized embouchure with their teeth. So I don't think in terms of physical for bassoon, I wouldn't say that there's anything. Perhaps if a student is tongue-tied, if, when they were a child and they were born and that wasn't medically, there wasn't a surgical procedure to remove the tie from the tongue, that might cause a little bit of difficulty with articulation, but it is something that we can work past. Each student is an individual, so we would work with each student with how they are physically in order to find success in the instrumental concept.
Thank you.
Anything else for oboe?
No, go.
Okay, great. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So for bassoon, it's kind of the same thing that Sue was talking about for oboe. I would start with the reed. Our reed looks a little bit different. It's a little bit wider. You can kind of see a little bit, it's quite a little bit wider. And with the student play testing, we talked about sanitizing. I would recommend the same thing, that the isopropyl alcohol would be good. And if you're there with your table, it might be good maybe to have 2 or 3 different reeds. So while one is being sanitized, you can move on to the next one that already has been sanitized. But yeah, I think 40 reeds is probably a little bit too much. 2 or 3 might help the line kind of go through a little bit. And for the reed, we would also want to do a crow. And I would advise the student to hold, we have the wrapping, which is our colored portion. Mine happens to be thread. Some reeds are maybe with hot glue, or some maybe have shrink wrap, but always want to be touching where the wrapping portion is. And so the bassoon embouchure is quite a bit different than the oboe embouchure. There is no rolling of the lips over any portion of the teeth. We want to say ooh. So if you say ooh, and you just kind of insert the reed into that ooh shape, and if there's a little roll, that's okay, but we don't want to kind of force a roll. Think of, when you pretend grandma, grandpa, and you pretend like you have dentures, or, your dentures are out. That we want to avoid. So we would just say,
I've been teaching bassoon wrong all this time. Sorry.
Well, there are a variety of embouchures. The pedagogy is ever evolving, and so this, I think, is the best way to help our students get the best sound production as they develop as bassoonists. So advise them to hold kind of here where the wires are. They don't need to know the anatomy of the reed, so we can just call it the wires, and just ask them to to go in probably about halfway through, and you can kind of help them gauge this a little bit. And just with that ooh, have them blow air similar to the oboe. And we want to hear that. We don't want to hear a single pitch. We want to hear kind of a multitude of things for the crow. I will recommend that students be seated when they do this. So I don't know if you recommend that as well, knowing that it's going to take a lot of air. Some students might get dizzy, and they haven't maybe used this type of air before. I know when my students learn really high notes, or even when I was learning really high notes, we would often get very dizzy. So I think seated is a good way to do the play test. So we would want to hear that crow. We would want the corners here, when we're talking about embouchure, the teeth to be separated, thinking about like the size of the egg in your mouth and with the corners in. If anyone ever grew up holding like coins in a change purse, the little like cinch, that's a really good analogy. Also think about like a straw. If you've ever had, you know, a milkshake or a boba tea or, you know, something like that with a straw. If we engage the teeth, we're ultimately shutting the reed down, and now we have no way of getting air through, the same way as if you were drinking out of a straw, you couldn't get the beverage that you had just purchased. So we want to keep the teeth away from the reed and kind of keep the oral cavity a little bit open. So after you've done the crow, we get the student kind of blowing air. Before going to the bassoon, I would go to the vocal first. I call this the vocal phone. And I want to see what pitch the student creates. Good reed, good vocal, we should produce about a C. Advise the student to hold here at the little neck area, and they can hold this and can advise them. But same embouchure ooh, and we want to hear the pitch of a C. If it's higher or lower, it could be an air thing, it could be an embouchure thing, but getting students used to that and kind of gauging if the student might have too aggressive of teeth engagement, or we might be too relaxed and just kind of their air usage. So if it was too high, we're really up there. If it's too low, almost no embouchure, no air. We start sounding a little bit like a duck, like a farm animal. So we just want a nice C. Then I would bring it to the bassoon. The bassoon is a little bit, I don't have a camera to move this, so Dr. T, if you might be able to help me with the camera. Bassoon can be played seated or standing. For young students, I'm going to recommend that we sit. So we have a seat strap. Dr. T is going to bend down. We want to make sure that seat strap is right towards the edge. And I'd put this down for the student, have them sit down, and then I would kind of buckle them into the bassoon. So the student would sit, you, the teacher standing, would lift the bassoon, help them put it into the seat cup, and then have them at least just hold it for a second. It's quite heavy. And a little bit unwieldy, the way that it kind of makes this weird triangle angle thing over our body. So we want to make sure that we're protecting the bassoon and the student kind of gets seated into it. Help the student get the vocal into the bassoon. And for the first thing is I wouldn't recommend putting any fingers on it. The bassoon in total is just about 8 feet worth of tubing. So we want to now take that vocal phone into the bassoon and see how the comfort level of the student putting air into about 8 feet of an instrument. Same embouchure. And with nothing pressed down, it should be an F. It should be an F3 just below middle C. So I would start there and kind of every student, beginning students, they're going to come with all shapes and all different sizes. Oh yes, please feel free to put the laptop down. Thank you, Dr. T. The students come with all shapes and sizes. There are student model, or sometimes they're called short reach instruments, and I suspect a lot of middle schools or even high schools might have these instruments, being that they're the student models. So students who are in the middle of a growth spurt or haven't hit their growth spurt yet, they're going to have an easier time hitting some of being able to reach the tone holes. But I would probably start with 1, 2, 3 C, very similar to a G on an oboe or a G on the flute, to at least set up the first hand, and then the right hand at least kind of, you can see it, just kind of hang out down here. But the lower we get through the instrument, the more difficult it is if the student, while we're play testing. So I would play test with a 1, 2, 3 C. Sorry, thank you. And just see if we can get that 1, 2, 3 C, very similar to the C that we were trying to get with the vocal. So that might be a really good way to see if we can do a play test for bassoon students. Questions?
What if they can't reach? Because the bassoon has quite a stretch.
It does have.
So that would just be the smaller instruments.
Yeah, I mean, mine being a professional instrument, we've got the hand span of it, but most of the I've never come across a middle school program that has not had a student model instrument. If there are certain keys that students aren't able to reach, there typically is always an alternate key that we can use. So, if it's prior to their growth spurt or while they're going through, we can make adjustments. If the student is really eager and interested in the bassoon, there's always ways to make that work.
And when I was a band director, my bassoons were mostly the resonite bassoons. Are those the student ones?
The black rubber ones.
Yes.
Yeah, so those are by a maker Fox, and it's their student line. It's called Renard, and it's a Renard 41. It's a
Yes.
polypropylene rubber plastic kind of combination. Those are wonderful instruments for beginning students, and that is a short reach. We call them a short reach bassoon, being for the student model, but the width or the span of the whole instrument is going to be a little bit smaller. And you can see where my ring finger is at the moment. This on most students is going to be the finger that's the most difficult to reach. There's going to be a little plateau key that will help offset, similar to oboes have little plateau keys that kind of help extend a little bit. It's something similar, a little bit bigger, but it'll be on the bassoon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I will say that those polypropylene, the black Renard bassoons, those are wonderful for students while we're trying to learn how to properly care for the instrument. I know I'm jumping ahead a couple of slides, but there is no opportunity for boot rot, which is almost a death sentence for instruments. So think of mold and science experiments. If water gets in the wrong places of the bassoon, i.e. this side of the boot, if this is the front that faces the audience, this side of the bassoon, it's basically a death sentence for the bassoon, and it starts to decay just like a log in the forest that has had too much water.
If I could just sort of echo a couple things that Sarah mentioned. Fox also has the Renard version of the oboe. They've got, I think it's the 330 and then the 333. Weirdly, the 333 is a lower model, doesn't have the same key work. The 330 has the low B flat and the left F here on the left hand, so the left F and the low B flat. And the 333, I think, doesn't have those, which is natural progression of the key work. So those I recommend always those Fox instruments, not just because I'm a Fox artist, but because they're they're good instruments, and they're pretty resilient, like not indestructible, but not dealing with wood and cracking and issues like that. And then Sarah, when she also talked about the embouchure, which for oboe, I don't recommend the grandpa denture lips for oboe too, which is super common. We've got the Metropolitan Youth Symphony Orchestra here today, and we worked with their students in the hour and a half before visiting with you guys. And there were 7 students, and almost all of them just like, hey, can you get your lips out of your face just a little bit? So that she's talking about for bassoon works beautifully for oboe too. Like, we need the cushion of the lips to cradle the reed, to allow the reed to vibrate. Like, that's the job of the reed, is to vibrate. So if we're like doing something funky with the lips and or the teeth, then the reed can't do its poor little job.
Yeah.
Its only goal is to vibrate.
Yes. I will say, if you want like a little pedagogical like history or sorts like of the bassoon, that grandpa embouchure, that was, I think, that was the practice, that was the pedagogy, I think, at least until the 70s or the 80s. So for decades that's what it is. So it's, when I see it, I'm not shocked by it, but I think there's better ways. I actually have a student in the studio who's suffering with an injury because of overbiting. And when you roll the teeth, when you roll the end, you're encouraging the teeth engagement. Your teeth start to dig in, and you start getting a little line up here, and so you're breaking the skin. Student starts tasting metallic, and it's raw, and it's very painful. So it's about health as well as anything, like sound production. Is want to make sure we're taking care of ourselves and we're not biting ourselves or injuring ourselves. So.
Yeah, for oboe, that sort of a setup, like, that's actually more of a European style of playing, where they do heavily roll the lips all the way in, and they're much further down to the thread, where we are trying to be really far out on the tip. I have a student right now from Venezuela, and he came in with a European style, and we're fighting every week. I'm like, hey, let me see some lips. And he's just like, ooh. And he just walks around going, ooh, ooh. I'm just like, if you could just do that all the time, that would be great.
Yeah.
Not yet. We're getting there.
I used when I was playing a lot, obviously since the stroke, I don't play as much, but I used EZO on my bottom teeth because, we do roll with clarinet and saxophone, and we get that indentation, but I used EZO, which is a denture pad, but I would cut it into pieces and put it over my teeth to avoid injury. So
our single reed friends.
Yeah, and sometimes it's unavoidable. Overplaying. I said yes to too many rehearsals and concerts and things like that. Florist tape, I have found I've used florist tape before.
I haven't heard of florist tape.
Yeah, but it's just being waterproof and but what nowadays when it comes to that, it's like, okay, I need to take a rest, and rests are equally as healthy as the practicing. So it's like, okay, yes. So my one student that happens to be injured, I was like, okay, we're taking it easy. You're taking this weekend off. We need this to heal. Yeah.
That's a wonderful thing from a teacher, because most of the time our private lessons teachers are pushing harder and harder and harder. And it's important to learn that, yeah, there is that point at which pushing's not going to do anything positive. Absolutely. And we start getting those diminishing returns.
Absolutely. Yeah.
My first clarinet teacher studied at Juilliard, and she actually severed the muscle in her face and her bottom lip. And even now, I don't know how many years later, but several decades, she can't play 7 days a week. She has to take at least 1 or 2 days off a week. And for a while, as her, after the surgeries to fix her face, she was a violist because she couldn't play, and put any pressure like that at all, as a Juilliard trained clarinet player.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's performance injuries happen.
Yep.
And it's our job as teachers to try to encourage good habits and steer the students away from those dark places. Yeah.
Outstanding. I love that.
Other questions that we can't get into all the nitty gritty today, but like Andre and Victoria and Tina, things that we can touch on here in our time.
Any burning question that you might have?
I have a few. Does the embouchure change over time for both instruments, or is it kind of, like pause, kind of like violinist fingers? Once the student gets used to it, then they start refining. Is that the same thing with embouchure for bassoon and oboe? And then, if so, if it's the same or if it's different, how does one navigate like any changes as they get older, maybe progressing from like middle school through college into adulthood?
Navigating changes, I would say very carefully is how we do that. No, ideally, we set the students up with that perfect, beautiful embouchure on the perfect place of the reed, and like they stay there. The chances of that happening are pretty slim. Most students that come to me, even at the college level, like we've got some undoing of the embouchure and then rebuilding. Almost every single student that comes to me, it's always you got to blow more air. You're not blowing enough air into the instrument, and then we start to fix the embouchure issues. But that's where I go first. First, it's the air, because if the air is not doing its job, then the embouchure is going to be doing extra work and not complementing the air embouchure balance. A couple of tricks, actually. Let me show you one. So a super common thing for oboe is to play with too much reed in the embouchure. I have one student right now that plays with a beautiful amount of reed out. It's like the picture perfect embouchure. I just got to get her to open up her teeth a little bit. So if the student's instrument has tenon caps, you have to be super careful, and I would actually do this for them. The tenon caps that go over the end corks of each of the joints, you take the big one and you very carefully put it over the reed, and then you take the second one. The hole's a little smaller, so you gotta be super, super careful. If you have them play, my reed's totally dry, so I don't know if that's gonna play, but it forces them out to the tip of the reed, like my Venezuelan student. This week, I'm like, you got to put your tenon caps back on because his reed is all the way in the face. I'm like, hey, you've gone back to Europe. Let's stay in the United States. So the tenon cap, I call it tenon cap torture. This is a really good exercise for them. The other thing that I have them do is called reed roll exercises. So they just kind of make their embouchure the way they would be doing it if they had the reed on the instrument. And then they're going to hang on to the reed so it doesn't fly across the room, but the manipulation, the change of the pitch is supposed to come from here and not because we're pulling the reed out. So they start, should be about a C. This is a beautiful exercise. I know it doesn't sound beautiful, but like beautiful exercise in theory, because one, the lower the pitch, the more they have to roll the embouchure out. Two, the lower the pitch, the more they have to blow. So that's a good way also to sort of assess like, hey, I'm not blowing enough air into that reed. And then that transfers into the reed going into the instrument, just like, see, air fixes everything. So I'll let Sarah kind of.
Yeah, so for the bassoon, similar thing. We wanted to set the student up with the perfect ideal embouchure for the bassoon. Because we are using that kind of cinched coin purse, like drawstring, we say, ooh, we're having to use like really fine muscles here. We talk, we chew our food, we're using our mouth and our jaw all of the time. But these fine muscles, they're not really being used all of the time. So it's very easy that they'll get fatigued. Students, as they're, learning the instrument, they're learning the embouchure, they're, learning the proper airstream, and they're just developing, they're going to get fatigued, they're going to get tired. And so just like if you go to the gym and you lift too much or you do 1-2 rep too many, you're going to feel maybe a little bit of a burn. The student may feel that. And what often happens is it'll start to hurt, and they instinctively will go ahead and bite down their teeth. And that's something that we have to work against. We have to keep reminding the student we want to say the ooh. But similar to the oboe, if we're overdoing it here, there might be a chance that we're not using the proper tummy and support in the airstream. I was telling my college students here yesterday that on my forehead, I will officially have it tattooed that airstream will solve 90% of our problems. Airstream will solve 90% of our problems, including embouchure, articulation, all of that. So yes, please. We are wind instruments, not face instruments or articulation instruments. We are wind instruments. So that's where we need to be. So I will say that, for a 5th grade, 6th grade student who's going into the bassoon, it's going to be a couple of years before they really feel this. And it's going to be, I don't want to say a battle, but it's going to be a little bit of an uphill to feel comfortable with the type of embouchure here. Every May, I try to at least take 2 weeks off. Those 2 weeks off, I feel the burn immediately as I get back. And I maybe am doing 10, 15 minutes, and let's kind of build it back. You don't start by running a marathon by doing the 26 miles. You start by taking a walk around the block. The one thing I can think of with changes as students are developing is oral orthodontia. There we go.
Braces. Yeah.
Braces or spacers and things like that. Everyone's a little bit different, depending on the shape of their oral cavity, the type of orthodontics that they are having done. I would just try to work with the students. I know I had braces. I wasn't playing bassoon at the time. I was actually playing flute first. I used so much wax to make sure that inside of my mouth wasn't getting chewed up. So we'll just kind of take it slow, and see. I don't know if orthodontia has changed in the last, I don't know, however many years of, what's going on there, but we might have some things to work through. Everybody's an individual. So I would take it as, student by student, depending on their particular orthodontia.
For oboe, orthodontia can actually be a godsend because they have to loosen up, right? Otherwise, the braces are going to start to chew up in their lips, and so they kind of have to loosen up and get a little more U-shaped. So not that we want the big changes, but it can actually benefit the student to have to deal with that. And then when the braces come off, you're like, think of how much space now. Your lips can just hang out and be lips and cradle the reed. And
I'm going to change topic just for a brief second here. I know we were talking about the play testing, and I just want to make sure that I mention it, that not all bassoonists come to the bassoon immediately. It may not be their first instrument. I mentioned that I started on flute first before switching over to bassoon, and either can work. So students can go, straight to the bassoon, or we can switch over to bassoons. I've seen success from both types of students. I think there is a case to be made that students might have an easier time switching to bassoon, recognizing that it's probably as tall as they are or just, a little bit shorter than they might be. I think when I stand, it comes up to about my shoulder when it's on the floor. But this way they're not having to navigate basically a 5-foot instrument while learning notes, while trying to read them, trying to learn rhythms and things like that. They might already have a foundation. So some students might find that a little bit easier. Recommended students to switch over would be those coming from the reed family. So your saxophones, your clarinets, and your oboes. They're familiar with the kind of the resistance that a reed has. Of course, embouchures will need to change. I have several students that also play saxophone. We are weekly talking about not using a saxophone embouchure on a bassoon. Anyone can switch to the bassoon, but those students that already have a sense of the resistance that reed provide can be just might have it a little bit of an easier time. But flute, I moved from flute. I've seen percussionists switch over, even pianists. So I think I had a dual trumpet and bassoon student at one point. So anyone can do it. We just kind of work with what we're working with.
For oboe, like when I ask a student, like all the 7 students I saw this morning, I'm like, oboe your first instrument or not? And it was about half and half. And I'm always so happy when it is their first instrument because there's no reason to not start a student on oboe, right? We don't have the same limitations as bassoon because it's like, if they can put their hands on a clarinet really or a flute, like they on an oboe. But it is that air piece that I think is much, much different. It takes way less air to make a flute sound and a clarinet sound. I remember trying a friend's clarinet in college, and I almost blew the thing up because the oboe air. I'm like, why does this not work? She's like, yeah, you just gotta scale back the air. I'm like,
calm it down.
Calm down, yeah. So when I was in middle school band director, I started my double reeds in pairs. I wouldn't start one because they're so different than everybody else. I felt like they needed a buddy. So now I know with intonation, probably odd numbers is better, but I think for learning, maybe even numbers is better.
Yeah, they're gonna, especially oboe, like they're gonna sound horrendous, but
yes,
let them sound horrendous in 6th grade as opposed to 9th grade or 10th grade. Yes. Like just get them over that hurdle early. They just gotta get comfortable with it, really.
I've always, for several years, about 3 years or so, I was freelancing with the majority of my income, working with middle school and high school students, and worked with actually quite a lot of band directors in developing their bassoon sections. And I asked them, like, give me a year to work with your bassoon students on proper air, like embouchure and airstream. I said, and just deal with the intonation, deal with the interesting colors and sounds that are coming out of that section. It's like, but if you give me a year, I guarantee it, you'll have in tune, in tone bassoons. And those who, I want to say that took me up on that, those were the sections that did really, really well. The ones that we were trying to manipulate for pitch, or we were, trying to add vibrato too soon. It didn't quite make the mark. So just be patient with your double reeds. Be patient.
Yes, I wanted to ask.
Used to.
Go
ahead.
One other question. I know we were talking about like embouchure. And now, just like for the bassoon and the oboe, do you work on breath control with the students? Like in chorus, we work on, diaphragm and all that stuff. Where is it the same for students who want to play, when you say, you need more air, expel more air? Are there like certain techniques that students would use in addition to developing the embouchure and maybe breathing techniques alongside with trying to make sound through the reeds themselves?
Yeah, I don't know if you want to go first. Or...
Go ahead. Yeah.
It's a very slippery slope for oboe because earlier on, really, it's just trying to get the volume and the speed to get the reed to vibrate. Of course, the reeds have to be functioning okay to make that happen. The things that I am trying to encourage the student, if they're just taking a natural breath when they're relaxed, like for me, I feel I feel expansion in the side ribs, I feel expansion in the front and in the back. Like I'm not trying to force them to fill up the low belly. I just want them to take a breath because they're going to have enough built-in tension just because of the resistance of the oboe sort of fighting back as we blow into it. So I'd say just take a breath. Where do you feel it fill the body? And if they need a little encouragement, like this is always a good trick, like just kind of hold your sides, take a deep breath, and hopefully they start to feel some movement other than like the upper chest. So we want to encourage them to keep the shoulders relaxed. You see a lot of students on any instrument going, and then you're like, oh, that's great. so for oboe, the early stages is just getting the air to get into the instrument, to get it to function. As they get older, we start to talk about refining the airstream. So it's not just a giant wave. We have to actually funnel the wave into a small column to get into the tiny, tiny little opening of the reed. So that's a different conversation. And then I do a lot with like equating how they feel in the oboe to how they feel when they're singing. That's how I approach vibrato. That's going to be a topic for a completely different day. But just trying to make sure that they're keeping everything relaxed, because the nature of the oboist is to be tight and tense, because the oboe has that back pressure that makes us kind of be tight and tense. So we're trying to eliminate as much of that as possible. There's going to be some that's unavoidable, but like as much as a relaxed kind of stance as we can get them to feel, I think is best practice.
Yeah. I would agree. Same thing with the bassoon. Just want the air production there first, and eventually, as the student matures, we do work on the refinement of it. The refinement of it does come with the embouchure refinement. For the bassoon, we definitely want a diaphragmatic breath, breathing real low. I use the analogy of like breathe below your chair, so they really feel that it's going down kind of like past the seat of the chair. Diaphragmatic breathing may not always come very natural, that's we're breathing that low. So I always recommend for students actually to try laying on the floor. Sue was talking about getting the shoulders sometimes raised. When you're laying on the floor, that's a little bit more of a challenge for the shoulders to raise, and it kind of gets them back to that innate stomach breathing and like where the air is actually going down. So I do recommend to my students that they lay on the floor a few times a week and just kind of make sure they're breathing, and then that is assimilated when we get back to sitting. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there for like just a second. I'm sorry, my brain has completely decided to stop. So as soon as that comes back, we will come back. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. So the shoulder raising. So on the bassoon, there is an oboe. There is no such thing as push in or pull out for like intonation the way that there is on a clarinet or a flute or a saxophone or even, brass instruments. Everything that we do physically and with the reed, and of course adjustments of the instrument, that's our tone, that's our intonation. So even the raising of the shoulders, or if we're physically tensed or, we're slouching in, the way that we are physically will be heard in the sound. So keeping those shoulders all nice and low, even if we're tense with our hands, everything is heard. It's magnified through the sound. But yeah, initially when they're, beginning within the first couple of years, we want the airstream. If we work on refinement, I think too soon, the balance of air and embouchure dynamics, all of that, it kind of clouds things a little bit, and we lose a really strong foundation. So airstream first.
Tina, I know we're out of time. Can you allow us to share so we can kind of pop that one slide with the QR codes for
Yes, absolutely. You should be able to do it.
Who can find it first, me or Sarah?
Mine is right beside my leave button.
I have the top, and I don't have the permission.
Yeah, it says only organizers and presenters can share.
Yeah, that's always a struggle with Teams. Worst case, if you'll send me the slide, I'll get my mass comm student to put it in the video, and I'll send it out to the people who are here.
Okay, sounds good. Any last quick questions before we jump offline here?
This has been really great. I really appreciate you all for for setting this up, Dr. HD, and for the both of you of giving us all this knowledge. Double reads is I'm a brass player. I'm a euphonium player. So woodwinds in general was very scary for me. But I was able to tackle that. But then now you get to double reeds and it's like oboe, bassoon. So it's very intimidating. But you all definitely laid it out in a way that's easy to understand. And I'm excited. I look forward to getting information about the reads, so that we can get more kids going and more kids tested. And I do appreciate what you said regarding the fact that it's always been a thing. Like, you have to be smart to play oboe. You have to have all A's to play oboe or bassoon. Put your smart kids on those instruments. And I always disagree with that. Like, I feel like anybody can do it as long as you can work hard. So I do appreciate you all saying that as professionals.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, thank you. I did have a couple just kind of short questions because I'm so new to the reed world. One, the threads, like the colors, is there like a significance of like a brand or like a professional versus a student thread? Or
Well, there are some brands that do like have that's their signature color. If you've ever heard of the brand Jones, I personally do not use that color in my box. So I have my box here. I don't have that color. It's a very royal red. That is synonymous with Jones. Like, we can see it kind of like at the other end of a conference hall. We can tell that that's a Jones reed. I believe Marlin Lesher for
Martin Lesher, right?
I thought it was Marlin. I'm sorry. Okay. The Lesher reeds, I think they're blue, and then emerald, I think, is green. Yeah. So there are the companies that are making versus a handmade reed by a double reed professional who might have their an Etsy shop or just selling, from a personal website, but an actual company, they might have a specific color that they like to use. I will say that Jones also now has purple. There's an artist line. I think the bassoon artist version of it, I believe, is purple. But no, the colors are just because we like them pretty.
Yeah. It's like the only fun part of reed making, in my opinion, is.
Yeah.
And then my last one is, are there any reed alternatives? Because I guess it's made out of wood. I'm not really sure exactly what the reed material is, but has there been any an alternative to this is a reed, but it's a different type of material?
Yeah, for oboe, I'm going to say not yet. For years and years and years, alongside with the Jones reed, they had the fiber cane reeds, and those were just god awful. What is the company that's making the
Leger?
Yeah, thank you. I hosted the International Double Reed Society conference here in 2016, so that's 8.5 years ago. And at that time, Leger was ready to premiere the American scrape version of the Leger reed, and they canceled because it wasn't ready yet. And I know that they sent some prototypes out for both oboe and English horn, but I know some people that have purchased one, but they're not. I don't think they've perfected the American scrape yet for oboe. So there's really, and the bummer is they're like $125 for a reed, and that's not. So that's a lot.
Yeah. Leger also has one for bassoon. I know several professionals who are playing on them in major symphonies, but that is not the only reed that's in their case. I know they still have cane reeds as well. Professionally, it can be a really nice backup. They have done really great things over the last 8-9 years with the bassoon reed that I do think it is a viable option. I know hearing the fact that one reed is $125 is a hard pill to swallow. And the issue is it might be the same with the oboe reed. There are no wires. So the bassoon reed has wires on it to help keep it all together. So if a student is accidentally biting and they're closing things down, we can reopen things up with the wires. With the Leger reed, there is no wire. So if it's completely shut down, goodbye to that reed and here's another $125. Of course, there's an ongoing price for these too. I haven't priced out like a Jones reed in a while, but if you're doing, handmade professional reeds from a bassoonist or an oboist, anywhere between $20 to $50, like there's going to be a wide range of sorts. So it's, I guess kind of the balance of where you want to spend the money a little bit. And, but there are additional options. Personally, I wouldn't have just the Leger reeds. I would want to have my options.
Yeah, the other thing about the Leger reeds is you really can't scrape them or in adjustment either. So like they are what they are when you get them. So there's no sort of fine tuning even with oboe reeds. You don't have the wires to do that. So
our saxophone colleague here, I believe, is a Leger artist. He uses them quite a bit. In speaking with Joe, he came to them, I think, during COVID, and has been using them quite a bit and seems to really like them. So I think the saxophone reeds, and I'm not sure about the clarinet.
The soprano clarinet reeds are very bright to me. They're very good for American music. I wouldn't use it to play Debussy. But the low reeds, like I came to Leger for the contra reed, because the thing about playing like contra clarinet or any of those big reeds is by the time you get the cane worked in so that it vibrates the way you want it to, it's dead. So I used them for the low clarinets because it was a very, very good way to have a sustainable clarinet reed. And that's where I really find they're the best. But I do use them on my soprano clarinet whenever I'm playing band music.
Great. Well, thank you
Yes.
for having us. We were happy to be here, and maybe we can do another session at some point in this year for the next phase of all things.
All right, and thank you. Yeah, thank you for being here. I'm going to get this ready and put it up in our archives, and I'll send you the link once it's ready. But and then we'll track that, and we'll get you back in here to look more deeply into each of the instruments.
That's great. Thank you again.
Thanks for joining us.
Nice to meet you both.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tina.
It was very nice, to hear, appreciate all of the intricacies that actually goes into the instruments. It's not just the instrument themselves, it's the actual person putting their emotions and their physicality. And so it was really nice to hear all the different facets that makes up, what is going into playing these instruments.
All right. Thank you so much. Y'all have a great week.
You too.
Have a great